Martin wrote to me. Martin said, I'm interested in the day-to-day lives of Americans. There's a lot of media I see is from the US. I'm in Britain. It makes the US seem like a caricature. The media I see, by the way, is mainly You and the Young Turks, some Sam Cedar, other progressive outlets. The only satellite provider in the UK, B-Sky B, which is partly owned by Rupert Murdoch, also carries Fox, so I enjoy that pantomime on a daily basis. The central subject of my email is about the New York City transit system. I noticed that you seem to have difficulty due to the popularity of the service. The same is true of the Tube in London. My local light rail is also called the Metro, and it has really spacious cabins, but is a fraction of the size of the New York subway. What is it actually like on the New York subway? Do you have any idea how long it takes to travel from one end of the longer lines to the others? It seems like days. Okay, very good questions. The subway really works pretty well here in New York City, okay? Now, it's different depending on where you live. I live in an area of Brooklyn that has 9 subway lines. So I have the primary one that brings me to work. There's another one at the same station that gets me 3 blocks away instead of 1 block. And then if both of those were for some reason delayed, I have another one that is at a different station in Brooklyn, and it would leave me 5 blocks from the studio. So I happen to be very lucky as far as that goes. There are some people who live, for example, in the neighborhood of Williamsburg in Brooklyn, who have one subway line that takes them to Manhattan. There was a period where every weekend that particular line was closed from Brooklyn to Manhattan. Thus, instead of being able to get on a 3-minute subway to go from Brooklyn to Manhattan, you had to find a bus that would take you over a bridge. It could take 20, 30 minutes depending on traffic. You had to walk a long distance to a different line that would take you all the way around Brooklyn and into Manhattan via a different line. If you live in one of those areas, it can be seriously chaotic. So while it runs well, depending on where you live, your day-to-day can be affected. The other question is an interesting one, Lewis. How long would it take to travel from one end to the other on the longer lines? The A line in New York, which goes from the very tip of Manhattan, I believe, inward, or it may even be the Bronx, all the way through Manhattan, all the way out into Brooklyn, and ends out beyond JFK International Airport. It is a 31-mile line, is my understanding, and I don't know how many hours it is. I mean, it is many, many hours to go from one end to the other. I'm sure there are people who have to actually make that commute. I'm sure with millions of people living here, their commute might be inwood to JFK International Airport, for example, and in that case, it is really, really bad. But remember, it's a long distance. It would take you a long time to drive anyway, right? It's not because of the transit system being slow that it would take you so long. So that's kind of the scene. I think, Lewis, where you are, there's very little public transit.
Right. There is very little, pretty much only buses and one little rail system. Austin is booming, and they don't have and are not setting up the infrastructure to deal with it.
Yeah.
Austin's going to be a total disaster. But for me, I've been to New York City many times, and the subway is absolutely necessary. It's a necessary system. I guess it works pretty well overall, but it's always very crowded. It's very dated. Everything stinks. You're constantly surrounded by people who stink and crazy people, and it's very uncomfortable.
Well, so Lewis, being someone who rides every day, much of what you're saying is wrong. So you may have been around near rush hour on certain lines. Like, for example, the 4-5 line is the only line on the east side of Manhattan. Thus, it's serving 2 to 3 times the population that the 3 lines on the west side serve. So the 4-5 gets very busy. When I come to work, it's pretty busy. The other lines, and sometimes I'll go on a different line if I'm going somewhere else, are really not very busy. Sometimes at rush hour they get busy, but generally the trains are not very full. As far as being dated, since the last time you were here, much of the many of the lines have been totally redone with new cars, right? So yes, of course, it's the same tracks, but all of the cars are very, very new. There are some lines that still have old cars, but they are new cars. They're all air conditioned. They have digital advertising and station stop boards and the entire thing. So I think you'd be pretty shocked to see how different it is right now.
Well, certainly I've been on cars that are almost empty, and I know that there are stations that are not as busy, but overall, you have to admit it's pretty chaotic.
No, I mean it is as a tourist. When I used to come here for the day, I would be like, I don't know how people deal with this. But once you understand the system and you're not always going like everywhere where it's really busy, which people tend to do as tourists, it's really not bad. I mean, in fact, compared to the Boston T, which I have a lot of experience with, I prefer the New York subway. It comes far more frequently. The cars are far bigger, and it reaches much more of the city. So I think that you'll have to come visit and revisit these antiquated ideas.
All right. You heard it from the New Yorker himself.
All right, that's it for this week's audience questions. We will talk to you Monday.